All right, let's now move to the case of a subsidy, and we have a inverse demand function which starts again at 8 and ends at 8 like all the other ones that we so far had. Okay, so that's our demand function, but look at the supply function. It starts at 5 and has a slope of 1/2. So that looks something like this. So this is the supply, and then is the demand. And now if we leave it to the market, if that were the market equilibrium, which is our benchmark scenario, okay, so we have our parameter, our value. So the equilibrium price, that's obviously 6, and the equilibrium quantity, which is quantity demanded equals quantity supplied equals quantity turned over. That is all. So the equilibrium and the quantity turned over, that is all 2. Now let's take a look at consumer surplus. So consumer surplus is, maybe that's a little too big. So consumer surplus is this triangle. This triangle, which is 2 times 2, which is 4, over 2, which is 2. So consumer surplus is 2. Now what about producer surplus? So 2 times 1, that's 2. Over 2, that's 1. So welfare is 3. Okay, so but now, let's just delete this again. Okay, so now we have a subsidy, and the subsidy is 3. So that means that the supply function is being shifted down by, oops, that didn't work. Okay, let's just draw it. So the supply function is shifted down by 1, 2, 3, and then it still has a slope of 1/2. So this is now the supply plus the subsidy. Okay, so now the new price is 4. That is what people pay at the cashier. The new equilibrium quantity is also 4. But even though people now pay at the cashier 4, those producers, well, they get 4 from the consumers, and then they get another 4 from the government, or basically from the taxpayer, so that the price that the consumers, that the producers get, is actually the price of 4 plus 3 the subsidy. So they basically get the gross price, which is 7. Okay, so now let's do the welfare analysis, and let's take a look at consumer surplus. So consumer surplus is everything below the demand function all the way up to the quantity turned over. Okay, so this is consumer surplus. Now what about producer surplus? Well, because the producers get 7, and this is the cost that they face, so we can draw producer surplus in this triangle, and you see there's already some overlap with there's some overlap with the consumer surplus. Okay, so let's already summarize what we have so far. Parameter, value. Okay, so the new price is 4, and quantity demanded equals quantity supplied equals quantity turned over, that's 4. So consumer surplus is 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 8. 4 times 4 is 16 over 2, that's 8. The blue area, producer surplus, that is 1, 2. 2 times 4, that's 8 over 2, that's 4. Producer surplus is 4. But of course that doesn't mean now that the total welfare is 12, because when we calculate welfare, what we need to do is we know welfare equals consumer surplus plus producer surplus plus tax revenue, but now we need to subtract the subsidy cost. Because the subsidy benefits consumers and producers, and we can already see it as part of the consumer surplus and producer surplus. So we must avoid that we double count it, so we have to subtract it. But where do we see the subsidy? Well, so we have 4 units being turned over in the market, and each unit turned over carries a subsidy of 1, 2, 3. So 4 times, so the total cost of the subsidy is this red rectangle. So, and this is 4 times 3, so the total cost of the subsidy cost is 12. So now how big is welfare? 8 plus 4 is 12 minus 12, so there's actually 0 welfare. So we drop from 3 to 0, which is a deadweight loss of -3, so the deadweight loss is 3. Well, where do we see this deadweight loss? We can see it obviously in this inefficient overproduction. So the supply is the real cost that we face in society of producing it. And so you see, they are now the producers, they have those extra costs, those blue dots. So like each dot is a producer and their reservation price, which captures the true operational expenses. And on the supply side, we have now only left a couple of consumers whose true willingness is actually much lower than the true economic cost of serving them. So in other words, the subsidy, what the subsidy does, it lures in extra consumers that we now serve at higher cost than what the consumer's willingness to pay is, and that creates, of course, a deadweight loss. So, and of course, if we try to identify that area, it would be this triangle, and that triangle should be 3. And of course it is 3, because we can decompose this triangle in an upper triangle which has base 2, height 1, 2 times 1 is 2, over 2 is 1. And then we have a lower triangle here where the height is 2 and the base is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, over 2 is 2, so 2 plus 1 is 3. Okay, so now a subsidy as opposed to a tax creates a deadweight loss from the inefficient more production relative to what the social optimum would be, or the most efficient point, which is where demand equals supply, which was at the price of 6 and a quantity demanded of 2. Alright, so now let's answer the question. What is the price after the subsidy? Well, that went down to 4. What is the quantity demanded? That's 4. Quantity supplied, that's 4. And that should be a D here. I don't know why there's a E, A, B, C, E. What is the quantity turned over? So that is 4. How big is the cost of the subsidy? The subsidy is 4 times 3. How big is consumer surplus? We said that's 8. How big is producer surplus? We calculated that as 4. How big is the total surplus welfare? Well, that is 0. So how big is the deadweight loss? 3. So, and again, I don't know why that is a D. It should be a D. Okay, so that's the case of a subsidy, and yeah, at this point you should feel pretty comfortable with welfare analysis. And the only thing I will not do now is also a case of a positive and a negative externality, but we did that in the lecture, so make sure that you also take a look at these. Okay, so let's just stop here, and then we still continue with a couple of quick multiple choice questions in the next video.